The Hound of the Baskervilles. Another adventure of Sherlock Holmes by Conan Doyle. Chapter 1. Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Mr. Sherlock Holmes, who was usually very late in the mornings, save upon those not infrequent occasions when he was up all night, was seated at the breakfast table. I stood upon the hearth rug and picked up the stick which our visitor had left behind him the night before. It was a fine, thick piece of wood, bulbous-headed, of the sort which is known as a young lawyer. Just under the head was a broad silver band nearly an inch across. To James Mortimer, M.R.C.S., from his friends of the C.C.H., was engraved upon it, with the date 1884. It was just such a stick as the old-fashioned family practitioner used to carry, dignified, solid, reassured. Well, Watson, what do you make of it? Holmes was sitting with his back to me, and I had given up no sign of my occupation. How did you know what I was doing? I believe you have eyes in the back of your head. I have, at least, a well-polished silver-plated coffee-pot in front of me. Said, but tell me, Watson, what do you make of our visitor's stick? Since we have been so unfortunate as to miss him and have no notion of his errand, this accidental souvenir becomes of importance. Let me hear you reconstruct the man by an examination of it. I think, said I, following as far as I could with the methods of my companion, that Dr. Mortimer is a successful elderly medical man, well esteemed, since those who know him give him this mark of their appreciation. Good, said Holmes. Excellent. I think also that the probability is in the favor of his being a country practitioner, who does a great deal of his visiting on foot. Why so? Because this stick, though originally a very handsome one, has been so knocked about that I can hardly imagine a town practitioner carrying it. The thick iron ferrule is worn down, so it is evident that he has done a great amount of walking with it. Perfectly sound, said Holmes. And then again, there is the Friends of the C.C.H. I should guess that to be of something Hunt, the local hunt to whose members has possibly given some surgical assistance, and which has made him a small presentation in return. Really, Watson, you excel yourself, said Holmes, pushing back his chair and lighting a cigarette. I'm bound to say that in all the accounts which you have been so good to give, my own small achievements do have habitually underrated your own abilities. It may be so that you are not yourself luminous, but you are a conductor of light. Some people without possessing genius have a remarkable power of simulating it. I confess, my dear fellow, that I am very much in your debt. I had never said as much before, and I must admit that his words gave me keen pleasure, for I had often been piqued by his indifference to my admiration and to the attempts which I made to give publicity to his methods. I was proud to think that I had so far mastered his system as to apply it in a way which earned his approval. He now took the stick from my hands and examined it, a few moments, with his own naked eyes. And then, with an expression of interest, he laid down the cigarettes, and carrying the cane to the window, he looked over it again, with his convex lens. Interesting, though elementary, he said, as he returned to his favorite corner of the city. There are certainly one or two indications upon this stick. It gives us the basis of several deductions. Has anything escaped me? I asked, with some self-importance. I trust that there is nothing of consequence which I have overlooked. I'm afraid, my dear Watson, that most of your conclusions were erroneous. When I said that you stimulated me, I meant, to be frank, that in noticing your fallacies, I was occasionally guided towards the truth. Not only were you entirely wrong in this instance, the man is certainly a country practitioner, and he walks a great deal. Then I was right, to an extent. But that was all? No, no, my dear Watson, not at all. By no means all. I would suggest, for example, that your presentation to a doctor is more likely to come from a hospital than that of a hunt, and that when the initials CC are placed between the hospital and the words Charing Cross, very naturally suggest themselves. Maybe you're right. The probability lies in the direction, and if we take this working hypothesis with a fresh basis from which our start is construction of this unknown visitor. Well then, supposing that CCH does stand for Charing Cross Hospital, what further inferences may we know? Do none suggest themselves? You know my methods. Apply them. I can only think of the obvious conclusion that the man has practiced in town before going to the country. I think that we might venture a little further into this. Look at it in this light. On the occasion, would it be most probable that such a presentation would be made? When would his friends unite to give him a pledge of their goodwill? Obviously, at the moment when Dr. Mortimer withdrew from the services of the hospital in order to start some practices for himself. We know there has been a presentation. We believe there has been a change of a town hospital to a country practice. It is, then, stretching the inference too far to say that the presentation was on the occasion of the change. It certainly seems possible. Now, you will observe that he could not have been on the staff of the hospital, since only a man well established in the London practice could hold such a position, and such a one would not drift into the country. What was he, then? If he was not in the hospital, and yet not on the staff, he could only have been a house surgeon or a house physician. A little more than a senior student. And he left 5 years ago. The date is on the stick. So your grave, middle-aged family practitioner vanishes into thin air, my dear Watson, and the fellow emerges a young fellow under 30, amiable, unambitious, absent-minded, and the possessor of a favorite dog, which I should describe roughly as being larger than a terrier and smaller than a mastiff. I laughed incredulously at Sherlock Holmes as he leaned back in the settee and blew little wavering rings of smoke up into the ceiling. As to the latter part, I have no means of checking you, said I, but at least it is not difficult to find out a few particulars about the man's age and professional career. From my small medical shelf, I took down the medical directory and turned up the name. There were several Mortimers, but only one who could have been our visitor. I read it out loud. Mortimer, James, M.R.C.S., 1882, Grimpen, Dartmoor, Devon. House surgeon from 1882 to 1884 at Charing Cross Hospital. winner of the Jackson Prize of Comparative Pathology with an essay entitled Is Disease a Reversion? Corresponding member of the Swedish Pathological Society, author of Some Freaks of Atavism, Lancet, 1882, Do We Progress? Journal of Psychology, March of 1883, medical officer for the parishes of Grimpen, Thorsley, and Highborough. No mention of the local hunt, Watson, said Holmes with a mischievous smile. But a country doctor, as you very astutely observed. I think that I am fairly justified in my inferences. As to the adjectives, I said, if I remember right, amiable, unambitious, and absent-minded. It is my experience that it is only an amiable man in this world who receives testimonials, only an ambitious man who abandons a London career for the country, and only an absent-minded one who leaves his stick and not his visiting card after waiting an hour in your room. And the dog. He has been in the habit of carrying the stick behind his master. Being a heavy stick, the dog is held tightly in the middle, and there are marks of his teeth are very plainly visible. The dog's jaw, as shown in the space between these marks, is too broad, in my opinion, for a terrier, not broad enough for a mastiff. It may have been, yes, by Jove, it is a curly-haired spaniel. He had risen and paced the room as he spoke. Now he halted in the recess of the window. There was such a ring of conviction in his voice that I glanced up in surprise. For the very simple reason that I see the dog himself on our very doorstep. And there's the ring of its owner. Don't move, I beg you, Watson. He's a professional brother of yours, and your presence may be of assistance to me. Now is the dramatic moment of fate, Watson. When you hear a step upon the stairs which is walking into your life, and you know not whether for good or ill, what does Dr. James Mortimer, the man of science, ask of Sherlock Holmes, a specialist in crime? Come in! The appearance of our visitor was a surprise to me, since I had expected a typical country practitioner. He was very tall, thin man, with a long nose like a beak, which jutted out between two keen grey eyes, set closely together and sparkling brightly from behind a pair of gold-rimmed glasses. He was clad in a professional manner, but rather slovenly fashion, for his frock coat was dingy and his trousers frayed. Though young, his long black and already bowed, and he walked forward with a forward thrust of his head and a general air of peering benevolence. As he entered, his eyes fell upon the stick in Holmes's hand, and he ran towards it with an exclamation of joy. "Oh, sure, I'm glad," he said. "I was not sure whether I'd left it here in the shipping office. I would not lose that stick for the world." "A presentation, I see," said Holmes. "Yes, sir." "From Charing Cross Hospital?" "From one or two friends there on the occasion of my marriage." "Dear, dear, that's bad," said Holmes, shaking his head. Dr. Mortimer blinked through his glasses in mild astonishment. "Why is that bad?" "Only that you have disarranged our little discussions. You're married, you say?" "Yes, sir, I'm married, and so left the hospital, and with it all hopes of the consulting practice. It was necessary to make my home of my own." Come, come, we are not so very far, after all," said Holmes. "And now, Dr. James Mortimer." "Mr., sir, Mr. Humble MRCS." Man of a precise mind, evidently. "A dabbler in science, Mr. Holmes. a picker-up of shells on the shores of the great unknown ocean. I presume that it is Mr. Sherlock Holmes whom I am addressing, and not... No, this is my friend, Dr. Watson. Glad to meet you, sir. I've heard that your name mentioned in connection with your friend. You interest me very much, Mr. Holmes. I had hardly expected so dolichophylactic a skull and such well-marked supraorbital development. Would you have any objection to my running a finger along your perennial fissure? A cast of your skull, sir, until the original is available, would be an ornament for any anthropological museum. It is not my intention to be fulsome, but I confess that I covet your skull. Sherlock Holmes waved our strange visitor into a chair. You are an enthusiast in your line of thoughts, I perceive, sir, as I am in mine, he said. I observe from your forefinger that you make your own cigarettes. Have no hesitation in lighting them. The man drew out paper and tobacco and rolled one up and one with the other surprising dexterity. He had long, quivering fingers, and agile and restless as an antenna of an insect. Holmes was silent, but his little darting glances showed me the interest which he took in our curious companion. I presume, sir, said at last, that it was not merely for the purpose of examining my skull that you have come to do me the honor to call here last night and begin today. No, sir, no. Though I am happy to have had the opportunity of doing that as well. I came to you, Mr. Holmes, because I recognize that I am myself an unpractical man, and because I am suddenly confronted with a most serious and extraordinary problem. Recognizing, as I do, that you are the second highest expert in Europe. Indeed, sir. May I inquire who has the honor of being the first? Asked Holmes with some asperity. To the man of precisely scientific mind, the work of Monsieur Bertillon must always appeal strongly. Then had you not better consult him? I said, sir, to the precisely scientific mind. But as a practical man of affairs, it is acknowledged that you stand alone. I trust, sir, that I have not inadvertently, just a little, said Holmes. I think, Dr. Mortimer, you would do wisely if, without much ado, you would kindly tell me plainly what the exact nature of your problem is, in which you demand my assistance.